They bullied her because she looked ordinary. No fancy uniform, no famous father, no money. Just a quiet woman who seemed out of place. But when the $1 million military jet went out of control, she was the only one brave enough to step forward. Before you watch amazing story, comment down your country name, I would love to hear. Sarah Martinez had always been different. While other girls her age were playing with dolls, she was building model airplanes in her father's garage. Her dad, a former military pilot, had taught her everything about aircraft from the time she could walk. But now, standing in the fancy pilot training facility, she felt completely out of place. "Look what the cat dragged in," sneered Jake Morrison, the son of a famous Air Force general. His perfectly pressed uniform had more medals than Sarah had ever seen. Did they run out of real pilots and start accepting janitors now? Sarah wore a simple flight suit with no fancy patches or family medals. Her hair was tied back in a plain ponytail, and her hands were still stained from working on engines the night before. The other trainees looked like they had stepped out of a magazine, all perfect uniforms, confident smiles, and expensive watches. "I heard she's here on some charity program," whispered Jessica Blake, whose father owned 3 private jets. Probably never even been in a real plane before. Sarah kept quiet and found a seat in the back. She had learned long ago that words meant nothing. Actions were what counted. But inside, her heart was pounding. These people had no idea who she really was or what she was capable of. Every day brought new challenges. During classroom sessions, the instructor would ask questions about advanced flight systems. When Sarah raised her hand to answer, Jake would make loud coughing sounds that sounded like fake and wannabe. The other students would laugh and the instructor would pretend not to notice. "Martinez," called out Colonel Stevens during one particularly difficult lesson about stealth aircraft. "Since you seem so eager to participate, tell us about the B-2 Spirit's radar-absorbing materials." Sarah stood up slowly. She could feel every eye in the room watching her, waiting for her to fail. "The B-2 uses a combination of shape and special coatings, sir. The iron ball paint absorbs radar waves, and the aircraft's flying wing design deflects signals away from the source. The edges are designed at specific angles to scatter electromagnetic energy." The room fell silent. Colonel Stevens looked surprised. "That's actually correct. Very detailed." Jake rolled his eyes. "Lucky guess. Probably read it off Wikipedia last night." But Sarah wasn't finished. "The aircraft also uses honeycomb structures filled with radar-absorbing materials, and the entire surface is coated with a substance that can absorb frequencies between 2 and 18 gigahertz. The maintenance crews have to reapply the coating regularly because it's sensitive to weather conditions." Now everyone was staring. This level of detail wasn't in any of their textbooks. 3 weeks into training, the humiliation reached its peak. During lunch, Sarah was sitting alone when Jake and his friends approached her table. In Jake's hand was a fake name tag that read, "Sarah Martinez Aircraft Cleaner." "We made this especially for you," Jake announced loudly, slapping the tag onto Sarah's uniform. "Thought you should be properly identified." The entire cafeteria erupted in laughter. Students pulled out their phones to record Sarah's reaction. Some were even taking pictures to post on social media. Sarah sat perfectly still, her face burning with embarrassment. "Come on, Sarah," taunted Jessica. "Say something. Tell us how you're going to be a great pilot someday." Sarah slowly stood up, removed the fake name tag and looked directly at Jake. "You know what your problem is, Jake? You think being born into the right family makes you a pilot? But flying isn't about your last name or your father's rank. It's about skill, courage, and respect for the aircraft. Something you clearly don't understand." Jake's face turned red. "Oh really? And I suppose you think you're some kind of expert? Your dad probably flies crop dusters." "Actually," Sarah said quietly, "my father flew F-117 Nighthawks in Desert Storm. But that's not what makes me a pilot. What makes me a pilot is that I've been studying aircraft systems since I was 8 years old, rebuilding engines since I was 12, and I've logged over 200 hours in civilian aircraft before even arriving here." The cafeteria had gone completely quiet. Jake looked like he'd been slapped. That night everything changed. At 11:30 p.m., emergency alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Sarah jumped out of bed and ran toward the hangar, following the sound of panicked voices and flashing red lights. In the main hangar sat the pride of the training facility, a B-2 Spirit stealth bomber used for advanced training exercises. But something was very wrong. Sparks were flying from an open panel, and the aircraft's systems were going haywire. "The computer system has malfunctioned," shouted Chief Mechanic Rodriguez over the alarms. "It's locked in pre-flight mode and we can't shut it down remotely." The weapon systems are activated and the engines are trying to start themselves. Colonel Stevens stood nearby, his face pale with worry. We need someone to get inside and perform a manual shutdown, but it's extremely dangerous. One wrong move could trigger the weapon systems or cause an engine explosion. The group of trainee pilots stood nearby, but none of them stepped forward. Jake, who had been so bold earlier, was backing away from the aircraft. Jessica shook her head when the colonel looked in her direction. "This isn't what we trained for," Jake muttered. "We're not qualified for this kind of emergency." That's when Sarah stepped forward. "I can do it," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Everyone turned to stare at her. Colonel Stevens looked incredulous. "Martinez, this isn't a training exercise. This is a real emergency with a multi-billion-dollar aircraft." "I understand, sir. But I know this aircraft better than anyone here." Jake let out a bitter laugh. "Right, the janitor is going to save the day. This isn't a movie, Sarah." But Chief Rodriguez was looking at Sarah with new interest. "You said you know this aircraft. How well?" Sarah took a deep breath. "My father wasn't just any pilot, sir. He was part of the original B-2 test program. I grew up studying these systems. I know the emergency shutdown procedures that aren't in any current manual." The chief's eyes widened. "Martinez? You're not talking about Captain Luis Martinez, are you?" "Yes, sir. He taught me everything about stealth aircraft before he died in a training accident 5 years ago." The hangar fell completely silent except for the wailing alarms. Colonel Stevens stared at Sarah with new understanding. "Your father was Luis Martinez? The test pilot who helped develop half the safety protocols we use today?" Sarah nodded. "He made me memorize every emergency procedure for the B-2. Said someday it might save lives." Without waiting for permission, Sarah grabbed an emergency flight suit and headed for the aircraft. The other trainees watched in amazement as she moved with confidence and purpose, no longer the uncertain girl they had been mocking. Inside the cockpit, warning lights flashed like a deadly Christmas tree. The smell of burning electronics filled the air, and the aircraft systems were screaming warnings in multiple electronic voices. Sarah strapped herself into the pilot's seat and immediately began working through the emergency procedures her father had drilled into her head. "First, isolate the primary power bus," she whispered to herself, her hands flying over controls that most people would never see in their entire careers. "Then bypass the weapons system lockout." Outside, the entire facility watched through the hangar's observation windows. On the control room screens, they could see Sarah working calmly in the cockpit while the aircraft systems slowly began to stabilize. But then a new alarm started screaming. The engines were beginning to spool up automatically. If they reached full power while the aircraft was still in the hangar, the jet exhaust could kill everyone nearby and destroy half the facility. "She has to get it outside," shouted Chief Rodriguez. "The engines are going to fire up whether we want them to or not." Sarah realized she had only one choice. She had to fly the B-2 out of the hangar and land it safely before the systems completely failed. The only problem was that she had never actually flown a B-2 Spirit before. All her experience was in much smaller aircraft. But her father's voice echoed in her memory, "The principles are the same, Mija. Respect the aircraft, trust your training, and never let fear make your decisions." Sarah activated the hangar doors and carefully taxied the massive aircraft out onto the runway. Behind her, she could hear radio chatter as the control tower tried to figure out what was happening. "Unknown aircraft, identify yourself immediately." "Control, this is Sarah Martinez. I'm flying the B-2 to prevent a catastrophic system failure. The aircraft needs to be airborne to complete the emergency shutdown sequence." There was a long pause. Then Colonel Stevens' voice came over the radio. "Sarah, are you absolutely sure about this?" "No, sir," Sarah replied honestly. "But I'm sure about what happens if I don't try. Taking off an AB-2 Spirit is nothing like flying a small plane. The aircraft weighs over 150,000 pounds and has a wingspan of 172 feet. As Sarah advanced the throttles, she felt the incredible power of the stealth bomber's engines pushing her back into her seat. The runway lights blurred past as she gained speed. At 150 knots, she gently pulled back on the controls, and the massive aircraft lifted into the night sky as smoothly as a bird. For a moment, Sarah forgot about the emergency and simply marveled at the incredible machine she was flying. But the work wasn't finished. She had to complete the system reset while flying, something that required her to input complex codes while maintaining control of an aircraft that few people in the world were qualified to fly. "Come on, Dad," she whispered. "Help me remember the sequence." One by one she worked through the procedures. Each successful input brought the aircraft's systems closer to normal. Finally, after 20 minutes of careful flying, the warning lights began to turn off, and the aircraft's system stabilized. Control, this is Martinez. All systems are green. Requesting permission to land. Permission granted, Sarah. Bring her home. As Sarah guided the B-2 through its landing approach, every person at the facility stood watching. The massive aircraft touched down as gently as a feather, its advanced systems helping Sarah make a perfect landing despite her limited experience with the type. As the engines wound down to silence, Sarah sat in the cockpit for a moment, hardly believing what she had just accomplished. She had not only saved the facility from disaster but had also flown one of the most advanced aircraft in the world. When she climbed down from the cockpit, she found a crowd waiting for her. But these weren't the mocking faces she had grown used to. These were faces full of respect, admiration, and not a little bit of awe. Colonel Stevens approached her first, his expression completely different from the skeptical look he usually wore. "Sarah, what you just did. There are maybe 50 people in the world who could have handled that emergency. And most of them have 20 years more experience than you." But it was Jake's reaction that surprised her the most. The arrogant young man who had spent weeks making her life miserable walked up to her with tears in his eyes. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you about 1,000 apologies. You just saved all of us and I've been treating you like garbage." He held out his hand. "I was wrong about everything. About you, about what makes a real pilot, about everything." Sarah looked at his outstretched hand for a moment, then shook it firmly. "Apology accepted, Jake. But remember this feeling. Remember that you never know what someone is capable of until you give them a chance to prove it." Word of Sarah's incredible flight spread quickly through the aviation community. Within days, she was receiving offers from military branches, private contractors, and aircraft manufacturers around the world. Everyone wanted to hire the simple woman who had tamed the B-2 spirit. But Sarah had already made her decision. She would finish her training at the facility, not as an outsider looking in, but as a respected member of the program. The other trainees, led by Jake, worked to create a new culture where skill and courage mattered more than family connections. The fake name tag that had once humiliated her was now framed in the facility's trophy case, with a plaque underneath that read, "In honor of Sarah Martinez, who showed us that true pilots earn their wings through skill, not status." Colonel Stevens often told new students about the night a simple woman with stained hands and a plain flight suit saved their entire facility. He would point to a picture of the B-2 Spirit and say, "That aircraft taught us that the sky doesn't care about your family name or your bank account. It only cares about your courage and your skill." Sarah went on to become one of the most respected test pilots in the country, but she never forgot the lessons she learned during those difficult weeks. She made sure that every facility she worked at valued ability over appearance and courage over connections. And sometimes, late at night when the wind was just right, people at the training facility would swear they could hear the whisper of jet engines in the distance. A reminder that somewhere out there, a simple woman with extraordinary skills was still pushing the boundaries of what was possible in the sky above. The bullies had learned the hard way that it's not where you come from that matters, it's where you're brave enough to go.